movement. I captivate them like Kaepernick with the Afro pick. Raise the black fist, activists, shut down establishments, catalyst. No category for this, no data recorded. Hip-hop musician, rooted classical origins. Yo, I'm Chopin with the pen, full of emotion. Shine bright under the moonlight, the black Beethoven. Revolutionary music must be Oakland, the streets opus. This a movement, not a moment. Sonata Allegro, yo, I'm in rare form. Bravado is clever, over 4/4 measure to measure phenomenal efforts. Encores, rounds of applause, sidewalks to concert halls. Who can rock at this hall? I'm bridging the gap, it's bigger than rap. Liberation librettos, I free the people with these conscious concertos. I conduct like Harriet Tubman, Underground Railroad, or NTT with the baton and the score to settle. When Michael Morgan put you on, that's a whole nother level. I was put on this platform as a vessel for the rebels. Black lives matter, and that's just keeping it real. If you heard of Mozart, but not William Grant Still, or Chevalier de St. George Walker Hale Smith, Florence Price, Ulysses K, so many others deserve light. Time to decolonize the repertoire. I symbolize those that organize, uprise, protest, and march. Create art. Reflect the times, that's when Nina taught. COVID brought the world to a halt. George Floyd murder broke my heart, but it was a spark, amplified the charge. Same call my ancestors died and fought for. No justice, no peace, equality for all, till we all in harmony. I write music might cause riots, like Stravinsky, writer's brain, first performance, this historic, starting good trouble. John Lewis, hip-hop, the music of the struggle. This a movement, not a moment. Cause you know we gon' be here forever, and it feels so good when we do it together. That's how you start a movement. We make progress when we open our minds, open our hearts, open our eyes. We on the front lines for our healing, hear the sounds of our freedom. It's a movement, movement, movement. Come on.
Who got us? We got us until the day that there's justice. Then there's just us. Bring your people to the street, tell them fist up. We coming for them seats with receipts. Best believe that you not gonna steal our hope like you trying to steal these polls. And we still gon' vote, cause we all know our role. Prayers work. Fast like a candle, light it up, action and intention, now dismantle. We coming for that office, so you can get off it. No, you cannot stop us, actually, we could run for office. Yes, I'm really talking to whoever's listening, cause this the people's movement, and this moment, it is everything. Hold your visions close, put your focus on the offerings. Say the names of the fallen, not forgotten, and stand tall in. The call in, double down. Tell me, are you all in?
All in unison, united as one. My recital was vital, instrumentals essential. Remind you how music meant to inspire you. 440, how my skills fine-tuned, shine through, clear the loom. Impressionistic, effortless, how I spit it with words. Reminiscent Rembrandt, how I paint these pictures on curves like exhibitions. Look around, the world shifting. This the soundtrack while you vision what you want to see. Feel the heart, never miss a beat. It's the art on the street that speak to the issues that seek to uplift you. Deliver us from the lesser of two evils. Realize the true powers in the people. My movements, a descendant of Huey Newton and Calvin Simmons. We occupied the algorithms, orchestrated wisdom. MacArthur Boulevard to the mission, 580 to Davies Camp Choice. He came and spit it. It's a movement. It's not a moment. Cause you know we gon' be here forever, and it feels so good when we do it together. That's how you start a movement. We make progress when we open our minds, open our hearts, open our eyes. We on the front lines for our healing, hear the sounds of our freedom. It's the movement, movement, movement. Come on.
Thank you, everyone. This is a rookie mistake. I was on mute. I'm surprised nobody did the typical Zoom meeting, you're on mute thing. Actually, everybody is muted on purpose. So it is what it is. But I want to first and foremost welcome you to Creativity Unbound, which is an exploration of the expansion of the creative process that happens when you add technology. And the specific technology that we're going to be talking about is 3D printing. So today I will be in conversation with Moddler's Jared Murnan. And but before we fully get started, and actually let me take a step back, I want to share with you that the song that you just saw was actually our very own Kev Choice, who is a phenomenal artist. It was him along with the San Francisco Symphony, and also featuring our sister love, Aima the Dreamer. So please check out Kev Choice's website in the chat and support his work. He has a show coming up at SF Jazz and a number of other very exciting projects. So we love Kev Choice, and we want to do whatever we can to support him. So now, welcome to Creativity Unbound. We just a couple of housekeeping items. Please feel free to go crazy in the chat. You're going to be muted for the entirety of the program until the Q&A portion, and then we'll have you sort of raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of your screen if you have a question. But for the duration of the presentation, you'll be muted. And but please feel free to be very active in the chat. Also, before we really dive into the content, I want to appreciate the fact that we have a very broad set of a very broad cross section of folks who are attending today. So there are a number of artists in the house. I'm appreciating some of my PDA cohort members from the AAACC and some of my cohort members from the Caribbean Cultural Center in New York. So welcome y'all, and other artists that I know from the Bay Area. But not everybody's an artist. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about the artistic process. Okay, so when we think about the artistic process, this is essentially the way that art is created, right? This is a really very sterile version of reality, right? So for when art is created, essentially you become inspired, right? You get inspiration from somewhere. Maybe you see something, think something, dream something. A lot of my work comes to me through prayer. You might have something that you've always wanted to do. You see a material you want to explore. Something sparks that inspiration for you to create the thing. And then you move to this phase of sort of developing it. So you start thinking around it. You start drawing it on napkins. You're in board meetings and your mind starts drifting off, and you start, conceiving of it and sort of building it in your mind. You get little pieces of paper and bottle caps and chicken bones and whatever it is that you might need to sort of help build upon this idea. And the idea just keeps growing and growing and growing, right? You might sit down, and if you're one of those meticulous people, which I'm not really, you might do some mind mapping or journaling or whatever, right? That's all part of the development phase. Then you start producing the thing. You start pulling those chicken bones and bottle caps and whatever else together, and you start just putting it together, building, trying, testing, etc., etc. And then, we think about this phase of reflection or presentation. So you look at it, you may go back and change some things, or you're ready to move forward. Now, that is a very linear version of the artistic practice. You vacillate and move back and forth in any direction between these different phases all the time. And when I tell you that the piece that we're going to be seeing today started out as something totally different, it started out with like 1/8 of what it is right now. That is the truth. For ages, I thought this was just going to be one thing. It started out as a hat, and we'll talk about that later. And then it just grew into something totally different. So now I want to give you a chance to learn a little bit about me. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am an artivist and a I'm a visual griot, or in West Africa, a griot is a storyteller. So I'm a visual griot. I tell stories through pictures. I also curate exhibitions and experiences. So I bring people together for different activities. I'm an artivist, which means I'm an arts activist. So I use my artistic voice to make a point, because social activism is very important to me. So I typically will share my artistic voice in and make art in an effort to teach or tell or express something, or any combination of those things. I also do some, creative capacity building. But at the heart of my practice is photography. So I started out as a photographer. I started out photographing family. This is my family at the last family reunion. And I like this photo. It was our last family reunion in person. I like this photo because, my dad's side of the family was who I was visiting when I first started out with photography. So I make it a point to always take a group photo, which is actually one of the things that I did when I was about 11. I organized a group photo. I don't know why people were listening to an 11-year-old, but my family loves me. And so I make sure I take one every year. Essentially, I also have spent a significant amount of time traveling, and I found photography to be a way for me to greet people, but also to share with the world my vision. So artists tend to see things very deeply in certain ways, and a lot of times folks don't understand that. Sometimes they're like, "Oh, you're putting 2 on the 10, you're putting too much on it," because they don't necessarily have that sight. So in an effort to share my vision of life in the world and also share my experiences, I've utilized photography for that as another way to tell a story and share my unique perspective. Over time, my work extended to talking and really like taking images to make a point and creating bodies of work. So this is from my Bacchanal Beauty series, which is about um, women who are of non-standard size or age participating in West Indian Carnival in Brooklyn, as an act of resistance against repressive ideas of beauty. So really just using that lens and showing things in the world that I see that are beautiful and that deserve conversation. After a while, I started photographing funerals. I was a Peace Corps in Benin, West Africa, and I started photographing funerals as a way to illustrate cultural continuity. So I was at a funeral in Benin, and I was like, wow, this looks really familiar. And it reminded me of the funerals that I would attend as a child. So I started photographing funerals just to illustrate to the world the ways that people of African descent and our Afro diasporic people are connected, but also to document rituals that are in some ways dwindling and dissipating, just to call attention to their importance and to remind us of just how important they are. I also, this is my website, so please visit me on thetracybrown.com. And also, I would photograph rituals that were all kind of memorial rituals. So this is a ritual that was hosted by Wose community in Oakland, California, in honor of the life of Baba Asa Hilliard Ibaye. So he's made his transition, and this was a special presentation for him. I also try to make sure I capture the things that, are common threads. So now in many, Afro diasporic funerals, depending on the population, you'll see people using drums and reincorporating drums, but the use of music is important worldwide to people of African descent in funerary practice. I also started teaching visual culture in different places in the world. So this was one of my little students in Haiti. And we would go on photo walks, and I would talk to them about the importance of capturing and documenting your own culture and using your own voice to speak for yourself versus having outsiders come in and give an interpretation of who you are, what you believe, and what you think and feel as people. So I've been blessed to teach photography. Teaching kids is one of my favorite. Teaching photography to kids is one of my favorite things. And this was also one of the little kids who came to the community center where I was teaching. So in later years, I moved on to installations, and I've been creating installations which are which is basically a display of various items that tell a story together. So they incorporate photos. Typically, this is Choose Your Punctuation from one of the Black Woman is God shows in the last couple of years. It is, it was my first large installation, and it really sparked something off. So that's the sort of evolution, how I arrived at this current piece that we're going to talk about today. And then also, this is another installation that was for the following Black Woman is God, called The Artificial Price. And here is where I start to incorporate the utilization of found items. So now, this was actually a piece that I found on the street. It was a toy, a Fisher Price toy. And I remember having the exact same one, the exact same model. And I happened to be walking my dog and I found it on the street. So I took it apart and remade it as a social commentary on what we expose our children to, how it affects them, how the government, the role that they play in outcomes for our children, and even sort of that little hypno spinner thing, sort of hypnotizing us with ideas about ourselves. So it was a multi-part, multifaceted, sorry. It was a multi-piece, multifaceted representation of an idea. Oops, sorry. All right, so now, I do with my work my best to capture the unique energy of whatever it is I'm expressing. So whether it was that toy and its accessibility as an item, people felt very comfortable with it. We had to put up a sign to keep people from playing with it. But also in the curation of experiences and, gatherings, I try to, they're always, exhibitions about something that's important to people of African descent. So Smoke and Mirrors was about the effect the war on drugs has had on people of African descent. And that was my first co-curatorial activity. And then there's also Same Game, Different Smokers, which was an exhibition about the history of the tobacco industry targeting the Black community, as well as the Benin to the Bay series, which is an annual series coming up again at the end of this year. But it was hosted in honor of the visit of Her Majesty Queen Mother Dewoti Desir Honu Hona of the Palace of Honu Hona in Benin, West Africa. So all of my work is about discussing what is important to and what concerns my people, because that's what I'm most interested in. So now let us hear from Moddler's Jared Murnan. He's going to join us live for the Q&A later, but I had an opportunity to spend a little time with Jared recently, and I hope everybody is able to hear this.
My name is Jared Murnan. I was born and raised in a town called Grass Valley, kind of an hour east of Sacramento. When I was a kid, I was always very artistic and spent hours of the days drawing, and that slowly turned into painting, and then that quickly turned into sculpting, and I sort of just was experimenting with all sorts of different mediums. My dad had a pottery studio growing up in our garage that kind of really quickly got me into clay sculpting and stuff like that, which I really took to. And my main thing though throughout has always been drawing, and that's kind of been the fundamentals of me as an artist. But sculpting was something that was always really a passion of mine, bringing something like into a 3D physical form, and always really gravitated towards that kind of thing. Up until all through high school, middle school and high school, I would draw during class, and always be kind of, that was sort of my way of focusing a little bit, was I'd sort of draw and not really think about what I was drawing, but think about what was being taught in class, and then draw at the same time. And that was sort of I think what really led me into sort of like a subconscious type of art, where a lot of the art I was making was really like on the go, in a flow of consciousness sort of thing. So many of the drawings and art pieces I would do were not planned out in any way. They would just sort of appear on paper and evolve in that way. And that became kind of like a very comfortable way for me to make art. It still sort of influences the way that I do art today. When I went to for college, I originally went to a community college. I didn't really exactly know where I was going or what I was doing at that time. Number one is my parents, we couldn't afford an art school at the time and didn't really know like how to even go about that route. And I was kind of sort of, you know, really interested in archaeology and other sorts of things like that. So I thought maybe I'd go that route at one point. There was a period of time where I was, you know, playing sports and wanted to go either do track or football or something along those lines. And the more I got into those kind of things and going those other avenues away from art, I noticed the more unhappy I became. And it was almost like I sort of gave up on a part of myself that wasn't, you know, it wasn't my right trajectory. And so my grades started to plummet. And once we noticed, as like, you know, my dad would, you know, and my dad was extremely supportive, and my parents were too. And we kind of sat down at one point, you know, in those years kid that's like, well, you know, what do you want to do? And you know, I was like, I really like making art. That's all I've ever really liked to do. Not that's the only thing I like to do, but that's something I've always maintained as a through line throughout my life. It's just making art in different ways. And so it was kind of that point we started to just like actually just toy around with the idea of looking at different colleges. And so I ended up at that point, first college I went to view and do a walkthrough of was Expression Digital Art College in Emeryville. And it just immediately checked all the boxes. Everything really worked out. It turned out that, you know, it was kind of financially viable to do. And I went there, and it was just like this whole world got unlocked to me that I, you know, didn't see as a path forward before. And from that point on, I basically got straight A's because it was just so easy for me to do art that I graduated as valedictorian. And my focus and my degree was in animation and visual effects, but I ended up doing a focus on 3D modeling. And so what I ended up doing essentially is taking the skills I had built as a kid with traditional art, doing sculpture, and transferring that to 3D. And it was a really natural progression to that. Of course, it's a different tool using a computer in 3D modeling, but that was kind of like a natural progression into that. So during that time, I also was interning at two different companies during college. One was a company called Insight Digital, which does archaeological scanning. So I took this hobby of mine or passion in archaeology and merged that with the 3D modeling. And so I got to do this sort of like really good mesh of things that, you know, fell into place in just such a really great way for me. And then I was also working at a practical effects studio doing traditional model making and traditional sculpture. That company was called Fonco Studios. We were located up in Lagunitas. And so I got to learn from these ILM visual effects movie veterans that worked on all these great films that we know and love, and learn from them doing more traditional stuff and then continue learning more digital stuff. And so those things kind of really all fell into place really nicely. And now to this day, I now work at Moddler. So that has led me back into the same bringing traditional art or physical objects and digital together. So that was
nice. Tell us a little bit about Moddler as a company and your work there. I think you're the director of operations, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So with Moddler, I've been working at the company for going on 6 years now. Moddler is a 3D printing company. We've kind of branched out more over the last few years into just general prototyping, and our main focus since the beginning, which Moddler was founded in 2008. So we've been around for I guess 12 or 13 years, maybe going on now. Has been high resolution 3D printing, and a lot of that has been to service artists and individuals, and anywhere from individuals to enterprises. So we've worked with all sorts of different companies, doing any kind of full spectrum stuff, anything from just artistic pieces, sculptural reproductions, up to 3D printing prototypes as validation models before companies go into injection molding with a product. We've done stuff with architects, medical devices, all sorts of different things. And it's been that Moddler in itself has been kind of a crazy roller coaster in my life as well. When I first interviewed there. I interviewed for a sales position, and within before I even took the job, the owner was like, "There's kind of been an interesting string of events happened. I got offered a job I can't refuse at another company. Do you want to run Moddler?" To which I said yes, of course. And I've been kind of not having a business background and being an artist. Luckily, had an already set up company that really had a lot of the tools already set up for success there that I kind of took and ran with. And I've made, the company has still evolved over the years, but it's been a really, really fun position to be in. And one of the things I like the most about the company is that we work with individuals and artists, and a lot of people come to us and say, I have this idea, I don't know how to make it come to life. How do we do that? And that's kind of where we fall into this, a service that really helps individuals bring an idea that they had from this imaginary land or from somewhere that's on paper or on computer into a physical world where we can, really enjoy those pieces.
So tell me how you have sort of shifted in your artistic practice. Originally you started out with your pottery wheel in your dad's studio, and now you are doing 3D printing, which is an extension of sculpting. So can you talk a little bit about how your artistic practice has changed or grown as a result of the incorporation of 3D technology?
Yeah, it's been kind of interesting. I mean, I feel like when I was in college, I'd heard about 3D printing, and this idea comes in like, oh, you'll have this 3D printer in your house where you print mugs and things that are super useful, and you can make this thing like almost out of thin air appear, and it's like this magical, useful thing. And that's really not yet what 3D printing is. Maybe it'll go that way, but it at the end of the day is a tool, and it is a complex one to some extent, and that has really changed my workflow in art for a number of reasons. One, because I have the 3D scanning background, I can go and capture with just my cell phone an existing object that I find interesting, scan it into a 3D model, and then bring it into a 3D software like ZBrush or Maya or something like that, and then further sculpt on top of that. And so you can make things that are from the real world already back to digital, then back to physical, and you have this really weird cycle of things going on that opens up a lot of really creative things. And so I think at times it's even daunting for me because I sit down and I'm like, I don't even know what I want to make because I can make anything. And so what is that? And what do I say with the piece I'm making? And I think one of the most fun things about it is that during that process, there's so many times where it just can go any direction. There's these unlimited possibilities, really. And I mean, yeah, you are working in the bounds of manufacturability with the parts. And that's something that's really changed a lot for me, is just understanding what is capable, like, what you can actually make, the proper thicknesses of pieces, all that sort of stuff. But it's really made me look at the medium of sculpture in a totally different way and what's possible. You can like really do refined models and do all sorts of different things. And it makes it much more easy to do like replications of the same piece. Like if I wanted to do a bunch of different like hands or something like that, I can print the hand, mold and cast it, and then do all these other things. And I didn't necessarily need to just sculpt it from scratch and then find, other workarounds. It's streamlining the process in some ways, and in other ways creating this other new, unique look to things that might not have been possible otherwise.
Tracy, you're still on mute, just FYI.
See there? Rookie mistake. So once again, I want to give you a little warning that the following images may be disturbing and may be unsettling to some folks. And they probably should be. They should be disturbing and unsettling to folks. So I urge you to take care of yourself. We want to invite you to excuse yourself from this virtual space if you find it necessary. Many of them will be images that you've seen, but just in case, I just want to put that out there because I don't know, people's level of relationship with these things. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the motivation behind the creation of the piece that we're going to see in a moment. Essentially, with this present time, I've been seeing, all these things in the media about the different groups, during the election and throughout the last administration, all these different groups of people who were supporting Donald Trump. So they're like blacks for Trump, which, or LGBTQs for Trump, or Latinos for Trump. And that doesn't really make any sense. And when I say it doesn't make sense, I'm not saying that I can't do the advanced analysis around the thing, and I can't understand what folks hope to gain with their support of an individual like this, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not in a place where I need anybody to explain that to me. What I'm saying is, it's still nonsensical. So on a cellular level, we have to start asking about people's sanity. We have to start asking about psychological issues. We have to, when there are people who work against their own interests in any way. And in this instance, I'm just choosing politics because it's so at the forefront of our minds right now. We have to ask questions about what's going on with them psychologically. Because if we know that we know about the relationship to white supremacy that this president and that this administration has, and we know that white supremacy is this belief that the white race is superior to all biologically, and if you support these ideas and you support white supremacy and you're a black person, you're saying that you're inherently less than. And we have to start talking about what's going on with people psychologically when they assume themselves to be less than. That's another conversation. But this piece started out as a sort of remixed MAGA hat. Originally, that's what it was going to be. And there's still an element of that, and that'll be debuted once the piece is finished. So you won't see that part today. But what you will see is the piece that sort of developed out of it and over time. So, these images, I got this vision for adding to this installation a slave collar, which is a torture device that was used to punish people who had run away. So it was folks, during chattel slavery who escaped the death camp, also known as the plantation, enslaved humans who, made their way off the camp trying to escape to get freedom and autonomy over their own lives. And they were recaptured by the paddy rollers or by the slave masters or whomever, or, just general citizens who were engaged in slave catching because it was a very lucrative job. And then these collars would be affixed to them. So you would see these different types of collars that were designed to impede their ability to make it through the brush. They were designed to also be very cumbersome, be heavy, but also to humiliate the person, to make them a spectacle, and to let everybody know this person is a flight risk. And so what I ended up having to do is so what came out of this marriage of my exploration of people's willingness to vote and act against their own interests and the slave collar, for me, it's remarkable that people will willingly affix this type of collar to themselves because they believe that doing so will gain them acceptance to the mainstream, will gain them social acceptance, will gain them, friends, whatever. So, it was very difficult because I had to research different types of collars to see, what the sizing was, to see if it would work for the way that I want this piece to manifest itself. I also had to in the studies, I just started seeing different types of torture devices that they were using on this plantation. This is what they call the bed stock, and you see the slave mask that's also used for runaways hanging on the wall. But these were stocks that people had to sleep in. So it was like, you were there, you couldn't get any good rest. You're already stressed and subjugated. Now you got this collar and you got the this and you got the that. And typically they didn't get to take these things off when it was time to go to bed. So there were things that hindered people's, speech and, ability to eat, et cetera, et cetera. Aside from, all the whippings and all the other things that folks had to endure, as a result, you see things like this one with, it's a headpiece with these tongue spikes. So this metal piece actually went into someone's mouth with these spikes that were meant to hurt the person's mouth while they were wearing this collar, for whatever time period, possibly forever. So, I saw a lot of parallels, but just looking at, men and women being pictured, held in these things. And the imagery is so striking and it's so shocking that these collars were used by abolitionists to point out the brutality of the system of slavery in this country. So, there were some that with the longer arms and the arms that pointed up, et cetera, et cetera. I think the other thing is you see these examples of them and you see them, documented in the different books, et cetera. And it reminds us that this wasn't just some haphazard, indiscriminate type of thing. It was really science. Uh, the slavery industry was an industry in America and in the world. And they were very meticulous and very clear. It also brought up for me what types of experiences the folks who were affixing them to people must have had, because these collars weren't normally outsourced. They were made by the blacksmith who was resident on whatever plantation space or in that area. So you imagine you are probably an enslaved person as well who has to smith this collar and put it on one of your own people. And what was the experience of the person having this affixed to them? How must it have felt? And we have to remember that this is a person who had just tried to escape to freedom, to get some sort of life for themselves, and it was a failed attempt at escape. So now you have that disappointment, now you have the shame, you most likely have gotten a beating, maybe you had a foot cut off. It just reminds us of just how brutal this system was, and these collars were an extension of that. So in reading these firsthand accounts, one of the positive things, the ones that brought me joy, was regardless, people still escaped. So they were like, you can put whatever you want on me, you can hobble my feet, you can do whatever you want, but I am determined to be free. I declare myself free. I am free in myself. And even though they had these cumbersome, horrible things on them, iron shoes as well were used, just horrible, all these horrible devices. And even though they had been humiliated, and even though they were, against this system that was legal, they were like, irrelevant. I'm leaving. I'm doing to do whatever I can to get out of here. And some people did successfully escape. So you would find these advertisements for folks who have run away that said this person was wearing a collar, So that was the bright spot for me. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this piece. So if you will bear with me for a second, I'm gonna bring it over. All right. So this is the main sort of part of the piece. This is the collar that was made. This was 3D printed, and it was printed in pieces and then put together per the process that you had talked about. I needed to, I made some alterations. I made some of the arms a little longer and made this a little curlier because there are things that are going to hang off of it. Thank you, Shalae. There are things that are going to hang off of it. But basically, this mannequin was also part of the piece. So you'll notice that she has these sort of what you would associate with the coon image, lips, and these coins over her eyes. So, putting coins over a person's eyes is something that is part of the death ritual. You put them over the person's closed eyes, and they're supposed to pay the deceased person's passage across the river Styx or wherever they are moving to into the afterlife. So this mannequin or this being actually has the dead person's coins over their open eyes, because when you don't love yourself, that's a type of death. You're killing yourself slowly and definitely violently. So you're perpetrating violence. You're basically murdering yourself when you murder your relationship to yourself, loving yourself, loving your culture, etc. So, and then this collar, which is which is the replica. Right now you may be able to see that it has a little texture on it. When the items are created, they're smooth, so the 3D printed items are smooth. And so now I'm having to rebuild the thing to add texture to it. So it opens like the actual slave collars do. And normally in real life, this might have been closed with a lock, right? But mine is going to be closed with something different that relates to the piece, but I still wanted that option. So this is going to actually be, once the buildup is finished, and it's just about finished, I have some other things to do and some sanding, etc. But it is going to be painted to look like metal. And then there's some additional finishes that will go on it. But essentially, this is it. It's life-sized. I looked online. Some people have had them created. Other people have had them created and to do different lectures and talks, etc. And I would see them try them on. So I decided to do that. And it was I can't even tell you. It was a very emotional experience to think about the fact that, to think about, having this affixed to you in real life, and to just reconsider and be reminded about the level of brutality associated with the institution of slavery was just overwhelming for me. I don't know how people were able to be so calm in trying those things on in the other videos that I saw online. And you can Google them and see people trying on slave collars. And originally, when I first conceived of the collar, I was like, okay, well, I got to make it. Because, I looked online, you can find them, but they're pricey and it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So I was like, oh, well, I'll just go and sign up for a class at the Crucible and I'll just smith it. And then I was like, Tracy Brown, you ain't going to smith no nothing. I barely have time to heat up soup. When am I going to go have time to learn blacksmithing, much less be in there making slave collars and curly? There's no way. So then I decided to try having it 3D printed, and I was like, I wonder if there's anybody that I'll be able to work with on this. And that's how, after looking around a bit, that's how I reached Jared at Moddler. So that is my experience with the thing. I want to now let Jared, I have this, we want to go back to my conversation with Jared and hear a little bit about his experience with creating it. Actually, before we go to Jared, I also want to point out that one of the reasons that it was so hard was that obviously it was calling up trauma. These are my people. So obviously anybody empathetic is going to feel something. But for me, it was just like, it really called up a lot of trauma. And it was real. And even the reality of creating this piece with a white man, that somebody who's outside my own culture, who isn't going to have the same relationship to the experience. And before people start flooding the chat with a whole bunch of superficial, we are all one people and racist, I don't want to hear it. I'm talking about the reality of trauma that is experienced by people of African descent in this country when you start talking about chattel slavery. That's real, it's complicated. It's a feeling and an experience that I have to talk about. And Jared was great. He was easy to talk to about it. He wasn't all weird like some people can be when you start talking about anything that relates to slavery or Black people or whatever. So he was a good partner for this process. But it was hard. It was really, really hard. So I just want to make sure I put that out there, because folks think, oh, artists, they make art, but we be going through it. When you stand up and you say you're going to be an artist, it's almost like the process of saying that you are going into the ministry. Anybody who's a minister knows the minute you accept a responsibility into the ministry, the universe is going to put you through it. And anytime as an artist you say you're going to do something, especially when it's something that is meaningful and that calls up history and deep historical trauma, um, you have to be prepared to be put through the ringer. So luckily I have a community of artists to support me, my friend Fan Warren and Angela Hennessy, who are all both amazing artists who just, and Brian Keith Thomas, and Laura Green, who have just helped me through this process. But it's definitely been a challenge, and that's real. So I want to give Jared a chance to say a little bit about how he experienced the making of this piece. All right, Jared. So, tell me a little bit about your artistic practice. We talked a little bit about artistic practice earlier in the presentation, and um, what's remarkable to me is the fact that you were sharing how you can be making something and then something starts to come out or something starts to manifest, and you sort of set your coordinates. You see where things go, things start to manifest, and you sort of go with the flow of what's being created while your item is actually being printed. I never would have thought that was a component or that was an aspect of 3D printing, because I thought it was very regimented, like you make your file and then it prints out and it's a wrap. But if I understand correctly, you're saying that sometimes things come out in ways that you weren't necessarily expecting, or you get your print and you sort of veer off into another direction. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun little of a process it turns into, at least with my art and the way I end up doing things. And a lot of times, because I have the background of like more traditional artwork, I'm thinking a lot of times in that process. But as my time, has, over time working at Moddler, I've begun to think more of like, in the parameters of 3D printing's capabilities and having more of an engineering, mindset to achieve certain things. And so it ends up being this kind of cool process where, maybe I'll initially draw out an object, I'll see it in 2D, it's an illustration, and then I kind of start to think, okay, in 3D, what is this going to look like? And sometimes I'll start actually sculpting part of it with clay or something like that. And then I'll be like, I think I want to do this hand 3D printed. And so, there's a ton of these like back and forth things that end up happening where I'll print something out and I'll notice that, maybe I want this little tweak done on it. And so then I go back to clay and I actually make something in clay and stick it on the 3D print. Or sometimes I realize in the 3D print that I want to add something else that wasn't there before, and I'll 3D print another piece and add that on the 3D print. You start to get this really cool evolving process where, at least for me, you're hopping back and forth between, traditional art and digital art and, 3D printing and playing this kind of repetitive loop between figuring out what the idea is and how to make it manufacturable with the parameters of the 3D print, and how to make things really just, the end goal is to make something interesting and beautiful. So, it's another tool to achieve that, and having that kind of at your expense to find out, what is the best path to make this feature or object or piece in general is really great. And the other really fun thing about being part of Moddler is that I get to see other people's artistic processes and how they achieve different things. And a lot of times, like I said before, it's people with this idea in their head and they want to make it into something that exists and is physical, and they don't really know how to do that. And I get to play a little bit of a role and hear how they're thinking and how they're going about their piece as it is and what they're trying to achieve, and then lend a hand in that process to make this thing a reality. And so a lot of it's, simultaneously, I'm helping out this person and this artist, but I'm actually learning for my own use at the same time. And so, and I'm simultaneously giving them ideas and ways to improve or achieve something down the road. And it's a learning experience for everybody involved, and that's the really fun part about the artistic projects is that there's usually no straight path forward, and just figuring out, with the tools that you have, how to best achieve that thing. So, it's a great tool, and it's, again, it really opens up a lot of doors for different possibilities that weren't there before.
So can you talk a little bit about the materials that are available for 3D printing? I see some that are more like squishy rubbery, some that are harder plastic, which is more like the piece that you guys created for me. But can you talk a little bit about some of the materials that are available?
Yeah, the materials actually of 3D printing are one of the coolest things about 3D printing, especially in modern day. I mean, at this point, 3D printing has probably, I think, been around for like 20 years or more. And Moddler got in right when we started to see that it was really viable for making beautiful pieces. And so that's kind of where we were like, okay, this is like 3D printing went from a conceptual thing to something that's actually useful. I used the idea of like printing a coffee mug, and while there are still limitations to that kind of stuff based off materials, the avenues and usefulness of 3D printing is skyrocketing. I mean, we saw during like COVID, all the people that had 3D printers in their garage printing medical supplies for people that we had a shortage on. That was like the perfect case of usefulness of a 3D printer. But it expands way beyond that, and it will continue to. And a big thing about that is materials. It's like, what can you actually make this thing out of? And so right now, most of the advances in 3D printing are in material sciences. And for your object, Tracy, or for your piece, we used a material that's called ABS. The reason we use that piece is it's actually really good right now for doing really big structurally sound parts. And what I mean by that is they're just strong. They're able to do pieces that are large. One of the big issues that is with 3D printing still is just a size limitation. I mean, there definitely are people that are 3D printing buildings and stuff like that, but that's really few and far between. And the availability of materials there is pretty much cement or something like that. And so as the materials progress, so do the machines. ABS, again, for instance, this instance was like the perfect material to use for the object. It finishes well. You can actually sand it. You can paint it. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. So, and it's not the kind of material that you drop on the ground and it shatters. So that's great. You can actually handle it.
But are there advancements towards like being able to 3D print glass and being able to 3D print actual metal, or utilize materials like sand or mud in a 3D printing context?
Yeah, absolutely. The materials have gone, basically for at least the extrusion type of 3D printing, which we used to do this piece for you, Tracy, was it's called FDM, so fused deposit modeling, which means it just gets extruded like a hot glue gun and then it solidifies. So a lot of times anything that you can heat up or have in a liquid form that will jet out and then solidify, you can 3D print. So people do that with clay, people can do that with mud, with cement. There's all sorts of also like composites that people make that are a mixture of different materials. So for instance, like for jewelry, a lot of people need like wax resin pieces that can be used for burnout molds. So it's a mixture of wax and resin, and when you heat it to a certain temperature, it melts out. So you can use it as a master repository for mold making. There's biomaterials that are your body will accept, that people will 3D print things in that can actually go inside your body. There's stuff that is just like more FDA approved skin safe stuff that you could use for a utensil or something like that. So you can really get into, and metals. Metals is a new advancement too. It's still kind of in its early, infancy for 3D printing, but it is getting more and more useful, and people use it for all sorts of parts that were never capable of being manufactured before.
Nice. So tell me a little bit about your experience with creating this piece, the slave collar, is what I'm referring to it as. But it's essentially a chattel slavery era torture device, and you don't hear people referring to it as such typically, but that's what it is. So I want to make sure I give it a name that is consistent with the reality of the thing. But tell me a little bit about your experience with creating this piece.
Over the years, I mean, like I said, working with a number of artists, so we get all sorts of projects come through the door that are, some of them are, like I said, some of it's just boring prototype pieces that are nondescript pieces. Some of them are really, intricate and insane looking pieces. And some of them, like this one, just have a lot to say revolving, around them. They're pieces to be discussed, and those tend to be some of the most fun pieces to work on because it's not just about this object; it's about the idea behind the object or what this piece is, what that object says. And when Tracy, when you approached me about it, I immediately was like, "What are you saying with this piece?" There's a lot of heat around something like this, of course, especially in 2020 with another civil rights movement. It's a piece that is a big conversational piece that you can, people are going to look at and take away a number of things from, and sort of, hearing, your artistic process and the things you're trying to say with this piece is definitely powerful. I mean, there's a lot going on to it, and the fact that it's not just a slave collar, you're saying, basically a huge commentary about it, and you're putting your own twist on the slave collar to say your particular narrative or point, and it evolves from just me seeing an email come through that like, hey, I'm trying to make a slave collar, into a whole different thing that is exciting, and it's cool to see, and for me working on the piece, it's kind of I'm playing two parts, which is here's this piece that again needs to look beautiful, and how do I manufacture this piece? And so a lot of that was just figuring out, I kind of ended up like just on Google looking up slave collars, and that led me into just understanding what they were used for, how they were being made, who was making them. And that is, there's all sorts of, you just read horror stories, number one, and kind of can see like what these were originally being made for. And it's just like, there's so many things that I felt like are still going on today that are, maybe it's not a slave collar in its physical form, but they're very similar in another, in that same way, depending on what it is, if it's an idea or something somebody's saying or what that is. The same concept as a slave collar is really evident all over the place. And then going into that and kind of seeing like, okay, if these were made of, maybe these were made of iron, maybe they were, metal hammered, all these different things. And maybe and a lot of these things were like one-off custom made. So somebody was putting a lot of time into making this thing, which says a lot about the whole thing to begin with, is that anytime somebody is really putting their time and energy and a lot of it into something, it gives it power, and not always good. It's not always positive.
Right, and they were typically made on the plantation or in the space where they were being applied. So it's just that thought about making it, who was making these things. A lot of times, enslaved humans were also the smiths, people who were also being held hostage on these death camps that we also call plantations. They were making these things and having this collar affixed to your body. Like, it was very just the reading the firsthand accounts of it, but even just sort of from an empathetic standpoint, thinking about the experience of being the person who makes this and what trauma that held for them, and being the person who is actually having this affixed to you and what it means, because now you tried to run away, you didn't necessarily succeed. That's, just reading those narratives was really a rough part of this, the experience for me, in working with this piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I never thought about from the point of the slave collar was, it's, I saw it as like a nuisance or a way that like it is hard to do anything with this on you. But after reading more about it, it was actually a huge humiliation tactic. It was supposed to be embarrassing and really obvious that it was on somebody. And that's a whole other, avenue of this that I didn't really see before. And coming down to manufacturing this thing, you think about that a lot too, because it went from me just seeing pictures of a slave collar to then having a physically to scale slave collar made. They were big, and I mean, I'm making a 3D printed plastic piece, but imagining that size of the thing being metal and on you would be extremely heavy.
And being heavy and also infecting your skin. A lot of people got these horrible infections where their skin swelled up and they were, and they had to remove it, but it was like a horrible, infectious situation. And then just it being cumbersome and heavy. Because I have cast iron frying pans that I got, that I inherited from my grandmother. And just the pan is heavy. So I can't imagine wearing something like this on your collarbone, on your shoulders. But praise God, people were still very determined. And a lot of people had these, they ran away. So you see these advertisements where folks, this person is wearing a collar. So they were like, you cannot hold me back. And I love that sort of, that was the encouraging part of the story where people were like, I don't care, you can put this thing on my neck, but you cannot continue to hold me in bondage. And I'm hoping that the folks who, in modern times are fixing these to themselves will also, break their own chains of mental bondage and release themselves from from that hold. But yeah, I think I'll be interested to see, like, once it's finished, the public reaction to it, because I think it'll definitely generate some conversation. So the audio gets a little funny from here, but I see that we have Jared has joined us, and we're going to have our Q&A now. So we have Jared joining us. Let's see. Wonderful. Thank you, Shalae. So we want to welcome Jared, and I want, for the Q&A, I want to ask folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, or we'll make it so that you can unmute yourself to ask your question. I was going to have everybody place their questions in the chat, but we have an intimate enough group today that we're able to allow people to unmute yourselves. So if you have a question, if you could go ahead and let's see, if you could go ahead and raise your hand if you know how on the chat, or if you want to turn your camera on and raise your hand, whatever you would like to do. Do we have any questions thus far? I'm really surprised. No questions from this chatty Cathy bunch. Well, we'll share a few of the comments that are in the chat. So Greg shared that one of the greatest works that we need to do as a country, and as particularly as Black folks, is to see what traumas are locked away in our bodies and do what we can to heal individually and in community. And creating art like this and hosting these types of conversations definitely is a starting point in that direction. We also had a wonderful insight from Angela Hennessy, who is a visual artist from the Bay Area. And she talked about for processing trauma, or she shared that for processing trauma, it makes sense that we would return to the site of harm, to the objects and geographies and things that are participants or witnesses in the bigger story. So making something like this, I want to remind us that this is about the infusion of 3D technology into our artistic process, which is sort of expanding our ability to make things and augmenting them. So like Jared talked about, being a sculptor and being able to 3D print something and then sculpt a piece to go on it, and sort of, we're printing pieces and painting on them and, transferring photographs on them, etc. This provides us with a new opportunity and new ways for us to access this this opportunity for healing. So again, Jared Murnan is with us now, and he is I'm wondering, Jared, if you have any things that you would like to share, anything else about your experience with the piece or the project, or even just the expansion of the artistic process using technology.
Yeah, I think that, like you guys saw in the video, one of the one of the big things is like, as a, you know, a white male working with you, Tracy, it's like a lot of it's just, and I think it all comes down, and going back to what I said about like working with other clients of all kinds, you always learn something. For me, as the person who they're coming to get help from, and the person who is, you know, is the client, or, you know, the artist or whatever, there's like always this exchange going on. But, you know, for me in this situation, again, going back to the situation that we're in another and continuing civil rights, you know, movement that's, you know, going on. I learned a lot in the process, just, you know, considering all those factors. And with the, you know, with the particular project, I mean, one of the, you know, you always in life kind of look at like things that are interesting or unique, or like, you know, kind of consider, you know, what sort of things are, you know, as an artist, I look at things that are like intriguing. And one of the things in this was like, what a twist on things to be a white male making a slave collar for a whole different purpose than they were originally made for. You know, like this is saying, you know, while it's telling the narrative of the slave collar and the story of that slave collar, I think Tracy's exposing a lot of the, you know, negativity and things that were associated with that in a way that it still is present today. For me, you know, it was kind of like an interesting thing to be in that position where it's, you know, there were, you know, people of, you know, white males making these things for, you know, for really negative uses back then, that, you know, it's kind of a weird turn of events, or, you know, something to think about, you know, being in my shoes doing that now.
Right, absolutely. We have a question from Angela, who asked, can we talk about, oh, she's asking me, can I talk about how I want the work to be shown? And she asks, is this a new piece going into an installation or a standalone work? Do I envision any kind of performance with it? So I'll answer the performance one. I'm not even emotionally able to handle the prospect of a performance with this thing. I just can't. I can't even right now. Like, I love that saying. I can't even. This is more contemporary saying, but like I just can't, like, in terms of performance with this at this juncture. In terms of, this is a new piece, and the installation itself, this piece will be part of a show, I believe. Well, let me take a step back. It's a deviation from my previous process. So previously, I would have a show, I book a show, and then I sort of create a piece for the show, knowing that I would still have it in my collection of pieces, blah, blah, blah. But I decided to stop that because that's ridiculous, and it's also very lazy for me as an artist, and irresponsible for me as an artist. I have a responsibility to create, and any creativity that is not expressed within oneself starts to metastasize. So not creating is not healthy. So essentially, this piece is going to be a part of a show. But which show, I don't know yet. Right now, I'm considering a show, creating a new show that is sort of in the works in my mind, which means it's going to happen. So it's called High Crimes and Misdemeanors, and I've spoken to a couple of artists about participating in it. But this is one of the pieces in the show. It's all about what we're witnessing at this in this contemporary time. There's also a question about when and where it'll be shown. Again, I'm not exactly sure. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure about when it'll happen, but it'll be, I have a feeling, because Spirit is telling me that it needs to be this year. So I definitely need to show this year. And I need to get this show done this year. So I can safely answer that it'll be shown this year sometime. And more than likely it's going to be virtual, because it's the Rona, and I really do respect the power of the Rona. I don't need to be out doing anything at this point. So yeah, Derek, why don't you tell us a little bit about any artistic things you might have on the horizon, or any cool projects you're working on right now with Moddler?
Yeah, so I'm usually simultaneously, like I kind of mentioned before, one of the nice things about Moddler is I get to work on other people's projects a lot of times. So that makes it so that I'm always in this kind of creative creative zone, whether it's like my emotion is going into this project for my own personal use, is a little bit of a different story. Some of the projects are just kind of more like, they come in and I'm there to facilitate helping them be made, and then the project's quick and we get it done and that's it. But simultaneously, I'm usually working on all my own projects that I'm more emotionally attached to, of course, they're mine. And one of the ones I've been working on is actually have one on the wall here. I'll show you really quick. The room's a little bit dirty, but if you guys can see that, that's a painting of some branches I've been doing a big series of. I have about 10 of these, but to keep it short, I had a terrible 2019 where my father passed away from cancer, and during that time, we also lost my aunt from a tragic accident falling off her stairs. My dad's brother died a month before him, also with cancer. And then I lost a friend of mine to overdosing. Like all this happened in like within 1 month. And it was a really tragic, horrible string of events that rocked my world completely. And so part of what my pieces I'm doing is I call them dead wood, and they're all pieces of wood that are deteriorated and dead, but they still hold this essence of what was once there. And so I use kind of the analogy of a family tree in this because I lost a lot of limbs in my family tree. And so this is my way of dealing with that trauma of losing family members and rationalizing death, and going through the whole process of that, and having things be, going from one state of being with whether it's a living thing to something that's dead, but still holding some sort of, essence in my life that of, permanence that I can hold on to. And so that's kind of the pieces. And so you kind of touched on, artists using, art as an outlet for trauma or dealing with that. And I think that that's a really big thing for artists, is having that way of like having a conversational piece with themselves, an audience, whoever it is, and getting that outside of themselves from within. And I did some projects in college that were really going down the route of, exploring creativity. And it is really something that if you're, a lot of artists just for some reason fundamentally have to get that creativity out of them. So
absolutely,
that's kind of what I do.
it's not something that just is born within us. If regardless whatever folks believe, it's something that comes from a divine space, so that you can't be held back. And also, I appreciate you sharing about your work around the trees, because the other thing that I didn't mention that reverberates throughout my body of work, including this one, is ancestral memory. So part of my goal is to honor the memory of the ancestors and also see their experience, because this is an ancestral experience for me. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands what they gave, what they felt, what they experienced, and even that they see what I'm doing. We, depending on what your belief system is, and one commonality, and this is not a generalization, but a commonality through African spiritual systems is a belief in the continuity of life. So when a person dies, they don't just die and disappear and it's a wrap. It's a change in social status. So now you've gone from a living person to the status of ancestor. And so, of course, that energy is still around, and they still, exist with us and stand with us and work with us and support us. We have a responsibility to also honor them and honor their names and remember them, et cetera, et cetera. So, so by extension, you may not have realized it, but you were also working on and a piece around ancestral memory with this piece, right? That's consistent with what you're doing. So I would call that divinity. So we have a question for Lorraine, from Lorraine. Go ahead with your question, Lorraine. And you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, there we go. This is an amazing. I'm going to actually show myself here. All right. This is an amazing presentation. Tracy, I really appreciate your work on these torture devices. And I broke my neck last year, and I was in a collar from my chin to my chest in the back, and I couldn't move. And I thought about these slave collars all the time. Of course, mine was designed to be as comfortable as something like that could be, but I couldn't move my neck, my head. I had to eat little tiny pieces of food because I couldn't open my mouth. And it's just amazing to see you making them into a piece of art like this. And I'm really appreciating the partnership here. You know, it's really, I think someone mentioned in the comment in the chats about how important it is for us all to partner together to bring these atrocities to light. The question that I have is more technical, though, which is to Jared. I'd like to know a little more about what's required to make a piece, to do a 3D printing. You mentioned scanning. A lot of the work that I do it involves opening up heads and chests and doing stuff inside. And I don't know how do you scan that? Are there people who are skilled in writing code without actually seeing an original piece? What's the exact, can you say a little more about the process itself?
Yeah, definitely. It's basically for 3D printing, you need schematics to print from. So that's in the form of a 3D file. And there's basically a couple ways to get that, which is you find an existing object, if you're lucky, that's online that somebody already has 3D modeled in some way. And there's a lot of databases for that kind of stuff that are either paid or free, where you can download that stuff. If it's something really unique that's never been done before, you either have to 3D scan them or scan an existing object, or you have to 3D model it from scratch. And so there's kind of two types of 3D modeling for the most part, which is 3D mesh modeling for, visual effects purposes, or something that can be more organic and less precise. And that can be in the form of a program called ZBrush or Maya. And those are kind of traditionally used, like I said, for like more artistic uses. And then there's CAD modeling, it's called, which is more of an engineering based one that you're doing. That's what people use to do a lot of hardware and stuff like that need really precise measurements and things that fit together properly. And so through doing 3D scanning, you actually end up with a mesh output. In order to 3D scan something, you need either a device to do that. It's a 3D scanner. And certain materials that can be more difficult than others. So you mentioned body parts and things like that. I've scanned people's feet, I've scanned heads, all that sort of stuff. There's even like crazy things they come up with, like really pale people. Actually, you don't notice it, but they're a little bit translucent, and the scanner has trouble getting through anything like that's reflective or translucent and scanning properly. So there's a lot of technique to that. And certain things are just like, if you're scanning like a glass object, you have to powder coat it to make it scannable. That way the scanner can actually capture those surfaces effectively. But once you have those schematics and the 3D model made, then you can get an STL file, it's called, which is the common 3D file that 3D printers read. And then you can spit it out to the printer. And there's a lot of nuance in there, of course, but just generalizing, it's a matter of getting your 3D file set up, sending it to the printer, and then you get the output from the printer, which is your object that you have made, and then you can kind of do what you need from there with it.
Right. And I know that there's Moddler is one of the firms that is offering 3D modeling services. If you are a Laney student, and I know there are a number of Laney students that, by the way, thank you so much, Lorraine, for your comment and your question. I know that there are a number of students from Laney College who are here on the line. And if you are taking a class on 3D modeling at Laney, you have access to the Fab Lab, and they also do 3D printing that is accessible for you as a community college student. So I messed up and I forgot to send Rick my info so that he could send me over the link, but just look up the Fab Lab at Laney College and know that that's a resource for you if you're a Laney student. So we're at the end of our gathering. We just have 3 more minutes. Jared, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Just for anybody who's, really interested in, this kind of stuff, just feel free to always, reach out to me. I've done a lot of teaching in my past, and that's a big part of my job, is just getting people, like I said before in the video, that like reach out and have a cool idea and they're looking to get it made. And I'm always interested in hearing what people are working on and looking to do. And, that's the power of 3D printing. And you also have the internet as a resource. If there is any questions you have, it's like anything. It's just think of the idea, look how to make it, and don't let that stop you. Like you don't have the capability to do this thing, because 3D printers have become very accessible. And while I do a lot of like industrial, like high-end stuff at Moddler, that doesn't mean that you can't get a 3D printer to use at your house and toy around with. One of the, one of the big things is just, spending the time and having fun with it, really. I mean, just, think of, again, it's all comes down to your, what you want to make and doing some research and stuff like that. And
Right.
the world opens to you with all these that are accessible. So.
Exactly. Yes. And I'll say that I want to encourage everybody to explore all of the options for what you want to do. The 3D, adding this 3D modeling, but just expanding my artistic practice with, working with a painter to have it done, and, having this piece 3D printed, and even like painting on a mannequin. Like, that's not stuff I did, but it's what came up for me. So I want to encourage the artists in this space. If you, whatever you see with your mind's eye, we know that it can be created. So know that there are plenty of resources around, modelers there, fab labs there. Any number of things are available to you to make your vision a reality and bring your dreams into fruition. So I am going to share our info with you. My website is thetracybrown.com. It is newly redone. I'm very proud of it. But you can go to my website and take a look around, learn a little more about my work, and keep up with my events. As again, I stated, the Benin to the Bay series will be happening again this year, and I have some treats in store for you that you are not going to want to miss. Also, you can follow me on all the major social media platforms. And then Jared, it can be reached at Moddler, and they are www.moddler.com. So you can learn more about what they do, see some more cool examples of the projects that they're working on, and maybe even have something made for yourself. So thank you again, everyone, for coming out, for attending, and I wish you all the best.